Mr. Mayor, I do have confirmation that we are live streaming and you may begin your meeting.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, councilors and senior leadership team that are here joining us tonight and the viewing public. I see we have quorum, so I call this meeting to order. And it is indeed a public meeting under the Planning Act on this Monday, June 14th, 2021. And for the adoption, for the agenda, I will turn to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a motion put forward by Councillor Olson that the agenda be amended to include the addendum item being an additional item number 4.21 for the agenda. If there's any discussion?
Not seeing any?
Thank you. I will start the vote with Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
And that carries. Therefore, I have a motion put forth by Councillor Olson that the agenda for the June 14th, 2021 public meeting under the Planning Act special meeting of Committee of the Whole be adopted as amended. For that vote, I would begin with Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
And Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, and that does carry. Mr. Mayor, we do have some opening remarks that we'll just share our screen, and we'll be able to read the opening remarks. Just give us a moment.
Should we do pecuniary interest?
Oh, certainly, Mr. Mayor. While we're waiting for the opening remarks, you can go ahead and call for pecuniary interest.
Okay, thank you. After viewing the agenda, is there any councillor who has a pecuniary interest or general nature thereof to declare? Not seeing any, Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's noted. I will just read into the record the opening remarks. This is a public meeting under the Planning Act for Monday, June 14th, 2021. All Town of Pelham in-person meetings have been canceled. Instead, the town is holding all Zoom electronic meetings via Zoom. Please note, no decisions have been made prior to this meeting. The Planning Department will be providing a presentation regarding the subject application. Participants are reminded, ensure your background is free from offensive or vulgar material. If inappropriate material is visible, you'll be removed from the meeting. Vulgar or offensive language will not be tolerated. If inappropriate language is used, you'll be removed from the meeting. Participant microphones and video cameras will remain off until they are called to speak. Once your comments have been heard by council, your microphone will be muted and staff will turn off your camera. Decorum. The public meeting under the Planning Act is a formal public hearing requiring decorum, meaning all comments are to be made through the chair. If you have pre-registered to speak, you'll be given an opportunity to address council at the public portion of the meeting. If you are live streaming and wish to submit a comment live, please email clerks@pelham.ca. Please note, comments must be received during the public portion of the meeting, otherwise they will not be considered. Disrespectful comments will not be tolerated. Cheering, booing, or hissing from the gallery will not be tolerated. Please note, if decorum is lost, the meeting may be recessed and persons asked to leave. Public portion of the meeting. To allow for an efficient meeting, each member of the public will be given the opportunity to speak to council during the public portion of the meeting. Please note, after all members of the public have been given the opportunity to speak, the applicant and/or agent will have the opportunity to address the public comments, concerns at one time. Please note, all comments stated and received electronically form part of the public record and will be considered by planning staff when preparing the recommendation report for council's consideration. If you wish to receive a copy of the notice of decision, please contact the planner responsible for this application in writing as soon as possible. Tara O'Toole, Policy Planner, 20 Pelham Town Square, P.O. Box 400, Fonthill, Ontario, LOS 1E0. That's T. O'Toole at pelham.ca. And this contact information can be found at the Town of Pelham's website. Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you. And I do have notice requirements to read in.
Okay, please do.
Thank you. Town of Pelham, Official Plan and Zoning Bylaw Amendment, Second Dwelling Units, File Numbers OP-AM-01-2020 and AM-04-2020. official plan and zoning bylaw amendment to permit second dwelling units in the town of Pelham. The Planning Act requires sections 34 and 22 that council must hold at least one public meeting for the purpose of informing the public with respect to the proposed amendments. This is the second public meeting being called. Notice of this meeting was published in the Voice of Pelham on May 19th, 2021 and June 9th, 2021. The notice provided information on the official plan and zoning bylaw amendments. In addition to providing information, we will also receive any comments which any member of the public may wish to offer. If you wish to receive a copy of the notice of decision, please contact the clerk in writing as soon as possible. Contact information is available on the town's website and will also be displayed on the last slide of staff's presentation to follow shortly. In closing, we stress that at this point, no decision has been made on the proposed amendments, and therefore, any comments received will be taken into account by council in their consideration. Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you. We do have our planner here today, and that is Ms. Tara O'Toole. Oh, I don't seem to see Ms. O'Toole. Oh, there she is. So sorry.
Right
Thank
in
you.
the middle.
Feel free to go ahead and start sharing your screen.
Ms. O'Toole, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for attending tonight's public meeting to receive information and updates on the proposed second dwelling unit policies and regulations for the town. Tonight, we'll be providing a summary of best practices and the changes to the policy and regulation since our last public meeting held in February that's been based on public feedback and comments received from the Niagara region. How did we get here? As stated previously, the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing introduced Bill 108, More Homes, More Choices Act in 2019. The bill proposed a number of amendments to 13 different statutes, including the Planning Act. The changes to the Planning Act require that municipal official plans and zoning bylaws must contain provisions permitting additional residential units subject to applicable provisions in the Ontario Fire Code, Building Code, and our municipal bylaw. The webpage dedicated to the second dwelling units project was created on January 13th, 2021. Following the first public meeting on February 8th, staff prepared a survey consisting of 7 questions. It was uploaded to the project webpage and released for public input beginning on February 17th to May 2nd, 2021. 20 members of the public visited the survey section of the webpage, and there were 16 participants. Further to the survey, staff continued to field several additional inquiries and comments, having been received by way of email or phone. Staff prepared an information report to Council on May 17th, which outlined what we heard from the survey and to provide an update to Council regarding the comments. In addition to these comments collected from the public, the Region of Niagara had provided comments on the draft OPA and ZBA that were presented to Council and the public in February. Council requested that staff prepare a best practices table to compare municipalities' policies and regulations pertaining to second dwelling units. Staff reviewed official plan and zoning requirements of other municipalities, including the Town of Niagara-on-the-Lake, City of Welland, City of Thorold, City of St. Catharines, Town of Fort Erie, City of London, Norfolk County, and County of Brant, as part of our research of best practices and understanding how other jurisdictions permit second dwelling units. Each municipality has adopted an approach that best suits their communities while still meeting the requirements of the provincial policy. Official plan policies municipalities have in place are to be permissive, and the zoning bylaws allow second dwelling units to be established as of right. The following are some examples of the best practices in official plan policies and zoning bylaws and the specifics relating to second dwelling unit permission. Staff looked at the number of units permitted, the zones that second dwelling units can be established within, the housing types, the size of these units, and other provisions applicable to establishing a second dwelling unit. All the municipalities researched included in the table permit 1 unit per property, except for the City of London, that allows for 2 units, 1 unit within the principal dwelling and 1 in an accessory structure. There was an update to Section 16, subsection 3 of the Planning Act, which now requires municipalities to permit 2 units per property as a minimum. Each municipality allows for second dwelling units in low, medium, and high density residential zones, as well as within agricultural and rural zones. However, the cities of Welland, Thorold, and St. Catharines permit the establishment of SDUs in commercial zones. Welland allows for a residential unit that may occupy a maximum of 75% of the ground floor area of any building in their downtown mixed-use center zone. In the city of Thorold, this use is permitted in the downtown and neighborhood commercial zones, but only within existing single detached, semi-detached, and townhouses. Lastly, the city of St. Catharines allows for second dwelling units in their local convenience commercial, community commercial, and major commercial zones, but are only permitted above, to the rear, and or below non-residential uses. The housing types permission is similar across each municipality, and SDUs are allowed in the following: single detached, semi-detached, townhouse dwellings, duplex, triplex, fourplex, row house, stacked townhouses, and an accessory building. In regards to the size of the second dwelling units, majority of the municipalities researched did not have a maximum size of these units, but rather they used a percentage of the principal dwelling unit to establish the size. For example, the town of Fort Erie allows a maximum floor area that does not exceed 40% of the total floor area of the principal dwelling and maintains a minimum floor area of 37 square meters. The city of Welland has no size restrictions on the size of a second dwelling unit located within the principal dwelling unit or a detached accessory structure. Norfolk County allows for the unit to be no larger than 45% of the total usable floor area of the primary dwelling unit, and the County of Brant allots 30% of an agriculture and non-urban residential lot, as well as 45% lot area of urban residential. All of the municipalities, save and except for the city of Welland, determine the size of these units based on a percentage of the principal dwelling unit or lot. The final criteria that was evaluated was what additional provisions do the municipalities have to establish a second dwelling unit on their property. This would include, but not limited to, the number of parking spaces, distances between the principal unit and the detached structure, height of the detached structure, and some other restrictions. All 7 municipalities require 1 additional parking spot located on the property of the second dwelling unit, except for the City of London, that does not have a requirement of an additional parking spot, as the majority of these dwellings are located closely to public transit. In regards to establishing the second dwelling unit on an agricultural or rural property, the County of Brant requires that the second dwelling unit be located within 40 meters from the primary dwelling unit, and Norfolk County is 30 meters. The town of Fort Erie was the only municipality that established a maximum height of an accessory structure containing a second dwelling unit to be the height of the principal dwelling unit located on the lot, or 8 meters, whichever is less. Following the public meeting in February, staff received comments from the Niagara region that identified some inconsistencies with the second dwelling unit requirements under the Planning Act. In response to these inconsistencies, staff have revised the amendments that were originally presented to Council at the public meeting in February to comply with the requirements of the Planning Act for final approval. The update to Section 16.3 of the Planning Act now requires that 2 units per property. Staff contacted Niagara Region Planning staff to discuss how this will be implemented at the municipal level, as all of the municipalities that were included in our best practices table established these policies and regulations before the update to the Planning Act. The region responded with this. The new regional official plan is planned to include a policy which will direct all local official plans to permit the development and use of up to 2 additional units as of right within a new or existing residential development, subject to any provincial criteria and appropriate land use, size, and locational criteria. Local official plans will be required to conform to this policy once it is approved and in effect. The proposed official plan and zoning bylaw amendments have been revised to address the comments received at the public meeting on February 8th, 2021. Niagara Region comments the review of best practices and council's direction. It's staff's recommendation that the amendments are considered to be minor in nature and no further public meeting is required. Together, the proposed official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment will provide the appropriate tools required to comply with the second dwelling unit requirements under the Planning Act. We welcome the opportunity for feedback and input on these amendments. Any questions or comments on these files can be forwarded to myself, Carolyn O'Toole, through the contact information provided on this slide. This presentation is available on the town's Engaging Pelham website and as part of the agenda package for future reference. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation, Ms. O'Toole. I turn to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, that does bring us to the public portion of our meeting. And we do have our first pre-registered member of the public, that is Tim Nohara, joining us. Ms. Leach will just be bringing him into the meeting.
There he is.
Thank you, Mr. Nohara. We can see you. If you wish, you may go ahead with your verbal presentation.
Tim, welcome to council. I think you've been here before. Go ahead with your presentation, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll make this brief. That's not one of my normal qualities. I know that. First, I'd like to thank staff and council for the efforts that have gone into engaging Pelham residents on this subject of second dwelling units. As a parent with adult children who are finding it today with price increases incredibly difficult to afford to live in Pelham, and as a son with a mom who wants to age at home, the work you're doing is really important. So I thank you for it. It's very important. I only have one question, and it concerns the proposed zoning bylaw amendment, and specifically in section 7F of the proposed ZBA. It states the maximum distance a second dwelling unit is permitted from the closest portion of the principal dwelling located on a property is 40 meters. There's some additional information there, but that's just the part I'd like to focus on, if I might. Section 7, my understanding, is for the agriculturally zoned lands in our town. And I believe it will be difficult for many in the agricultural areas of our town, especially in light of 2 secondary dwelling units being permissible. It'll be difficult if the secondary dwelling units required to be within 40 meters of the main dwelling. And I say that just given the diversity of agricultural properties in the town, including such things as privacy considerations, the septic system considerations, and the potential need for expansion that are described in the proposed amendments. The fact that many of them have existing structures in the immediate vicinity of the principal dwelling, structures such as decks, driveways, pools, cisterns, ponds, sheds, gazebos, And then if there happens to be, or if somebody has plans for a second secondary dwelling unit. I'm wondering, since the proposed official plan amendment, section B229G, since that ensures that any secondary dwelling unit will be subject to site plan control, I'm wondering, in light of that, if you could please give consideration to removing that 40-meter requirement. Alternatively, you might consider increasing the 40 meters to some larger number, 100 meters maybe, I don't know. And or you might consider changing the reference point from the closest portion of the principal dwelling to maybe the closest portion of the nearest building or structure. Those are just some thoughts, I think, that could possibly make it much less restrictive. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tim, for those thoughts. Ms. O'Toole, any comments you would like to make at this time?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, with regards to the maximum distance between the two, the 40 meters, the idea behind that is that we wanted to ensure that they were maintained in the same cluster so that it didn't look so independent of the principal dwelling, and also just another mechanism for us to control taking out some agricultural areas that could be farmed or anything like that, to try to keep it together. And by that as well, we were working with the region to ensure that if you could, if possible, the existing septic, having that be part of this additional dwelling unit so that they were on the same septic. So again, we could reduce any impact that we would have on any agricultural lands. However, if it is a conversion of an existing structure, that 40 meters, obviously, if that structure is further than that, it doesn't come into effect. And then there's other things that we need to look at. But I can throw it over to Barb if there's any additional information with respect to the distance.
Ms. Weens?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Certainly, I think Tara summarized it very well. We're trying to, again, ensure that, particularly in the rural agricultural area, that the second dwelling units are clustered around existing buildings and structures to minimize the impact on nearby or surrounding agricultural lands, as well as any nearby kind of natural heritage elements or features that might exist on the landscape. So, there is always, if there is a particular circumstance that warrants the change to something different, something larger, then there is the ability to seek a variance through the Committee of Adjustment on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you, Ms. Weens. Any further comments, Mr. Nahara?
No, those are excellent answers, and I certainly appreciate those. I would indicate it's just you're trying to. I know you have the difficult task of trying to manage those objectives, and I agree with those objectives. You capture them well, I think, in the official plan amendment and even in some of the other regulations regarding the loss of agricultural lands, for example. So I appreciate the objectives very much. I know official plans and zoning bylaws don't change that often, so I'm always thinking of how sometimes, certainly I understand that measure, I understand why proximate to the home it makes sense, but if there was another or more options, I would just think it would be more flexible. But I appreciate I know what's driving your interest, and I certainly respect that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tim, for taking the time to appear before council. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Madam Clerk?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. We'll bring in our second pre-registered member of the public, and that is John Kappa. Just give us one moment. Hi, Mr. Kappa. We can see you in the meeting. It seems that you've muted yourself, so if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Hello, everybody. I'll just put on the video here so we can get started.
Wonderful. Thank you. Please feel free to go ahead with your presentation.
Okay. So first of all, everyone, it's my pleasure to join you guys again. I know I've been on before and, talked the last time we got together. Really, I wanted to be on today to really commend the council, just like the previous gentleman did, on the amount of work and time that goes into something like this. It was great to see that council had taken away some of the ideas, and I was really excited to see the best practices in the presentation, which made a lot of sense because obviously a lot of the municipalities have gone through this, towns have gone through this, and obviously you guys have tapped into that, so that was great. The point I want to make, and I have a question at the end, but the point I'd like to make here is that, this is all well and good. I guess the idea here is to make sure that we, continue to have some sort of affordability in Fawn Hill, as everyone's, mentioned. I have children too. We all have families, and we have seniors in our family, and just having more options to be a little bit more financially stable by taking advantage of this bylaw really is really going to help a lot of people. And I don't think we even know how much this will help people because it'll be a tough thing to measure. And the other thing too is that, it provides almost a financial assistance that really wouldn't be there any other way. It's not like they could find this type of support any other way. So I just think it's important that we highlight, some of the reasons why we're doing this other than the obvious, which is, progress. I think that it is, part of our town to grow and to be, welcoming people and growing as a community. And we also need to think about the people that have been here and kind of, grown up here and raised here, giving them a chance to stay and find a way to live in their community. And that's really it. And so my question, guys, really to the team is, this process has taken quite some time. I know that we're not voting on it again tonight, but what is the time frame, or are we closer? I know I keep reading more and more, amendments and process, but what is the timing, and how does council see this kind of unfolding over the next little while, just so that we have an idea of, when this hopefully will be voted on and passed?
Okay. Thanks, John, for taking the time to make your presentation tonight. And I will ask Ms. O'Toole to address the time frame.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I guess our time frame is just dependent on the outcome of this meeting. This meeting is to bring forward information to council with regards to the revisions that we made to the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendments since our previous meeting. Based on the outcome of this evening, we are hoping to bring a recommendation report back to council to have them approve the amendments anytime after this meeting, probably this summer. Let's hope for this summer.
Okay, thank you. I will go to the Director of Planning, Ms. Weens. Any comments, any tighter timelines on that, or is that about it?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, certainly, as Ms. O'Toole indicated, depending on the results of this meeting, our goal would be to bring a recommendation report to council at the July meeting. And then there is one meeting in July, and then the OPA and ZBA would be then put on council's agenda for, for August for the actual adoption. So as Ms. O'Toole indicated, we hope to have this wrapped up this summer.
Okay, thank you. Does that give you an idea, Mr. Kappa?
Yes, thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate it. And yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. I turn to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Our third and final pre-registered member of the public is Patrick Maloney, and we're just bringing him into the meeting now. Thank you. We can see you, and if you'd like to go ahead and begin your verbal presentation.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on the proposed amendments relating to second dwelling units. I am appearing on behalf of two clients, Homes by Antonio and Mr. Tony Mancini, who have various development interests in the town of Pelham. You may recall that we originally made submissions that asked that second dwelling units be permitted not only in single detached dwellings, but also semis and townhouses. And we are very pleased that planning staff have included those types of dwellings as ones that can have second dwelling units. So my clients do support that change and ask that council approve it as well. My clients did want to raise one further change to the zoning amendments that the town of Pelham is about to do. And it relates to the total floor area of a second dwelling unit. And Ms. O'Toole, through her presentation, did talk about some of the best practices, so it's a good lead into that. We did provide a written submission, and which I understand was forwarded to you overall. With respect to our comments, in the draft official plan amendments, it is made clear that a second dwelling unit must be secondary to that primary residential use. And the total floor area must be less than half of the primary residential use. And that makes sense. That's the whole point of this. However, the draft zoning amendments then place a specific limitation on size to a maximum of 700 square feet in residential zones. And it's my client's opinion that limiting that specific maximum floor area is not necessary, so long as that second dwelling unit is less than half of the dwelling, similar to what is stated in the official plan. And we think that the zoning should be a little bit more general and provide a little bit more flexibility. Why do we take this position? Well, I think we have three reasons. The first is that in larger homes, it may not make sense to have a limitation of only 700 square feet. So as an example, if a person did have a larger home, say for instance, a 3,000 square foot home, and wanted their parents to live in a more reasonably sized secondary dwelling within that principal dwelling, that is something greater than 700 meters, then it wouldn't be permitted. So Ms. Wiens alluded to the fact that you would have to seek a minor variance, which I think is unnecessary and potentially expensive, and it could be refused or appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal. This also could lead to a person in a larger home installing a second dwelling unit, which may not be desirable in the case. The second reason why we feel that there shouldn't be a specific maximum floor area is that it's more of a practical reason. In an existing home, there may be a functional area that is ideal for that second dwelling unit, say for instance, the entire basement or the entire second floor, which may be greater than that 700 square feet. So by having that strict limitation, it does make creating that second dwelling unit a little bit more problematic and could result in an area that where the dwelling or part of the dwelling may be unusable. Lastly, the second 700 square feet really limits who can live in that second dwelling unit. It is a relatively small area and maybe not suitable for small families or even two adults who do not want to be cramped into a smaller area. So overall, Mr. Mayor, members of council, we would ask that you consider removing any specific maximum floor area and include a requirement similar to what is in the official plan, namely that a second dwelling unit be something less than half of the dwelling. That would then provide that greater flexibility and which was likely required in many circumstances. Ms. O'Toole did note what other municipalities were doing, and many of them were based on a percentage basis, which provided a little bit more flexibility. So thank you for your time this evening. Subject to any questions, those are all my submissions, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you for taking the time to make this submission tonight. I will ask Ms. O'Toole, after hearing the comments, have you got any immediate replies to Mr. Mahoney's concerns?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's something that we can take a look at. I'd like Barb to respond a little bit more in depth with regards to the idea of the percentages.
Ms. Wiens, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we are looking at, different ways of being able to regulate the size of the second dwelling unit. And as the best practices table indicates, a number of municipalities use a percentage, 30%, 40%, and is as a means of regulating the size. When we looked at that, particularly with perhaps the smaller residential dwellings that are 1,000, 11, or 1,200 square feet, you end up with some fairly small units that might not be very practical or functional. And so we thought the best approach would be to establish a particular unit size and make it a maximum. And that way, again, we ensure that the dwelling unit is indeed subordinate to the main dwelling unit. It is also tries to focus on one of our objectives, which is to provide for, some type of housing affordability. That if we have second dwelling units that are larger, if it's a 3,000 square foot home and it's 50%, then you could have presumably a 1,500 square foot second dwelling unit. And I don't think at that point that we'd be hitting some of our affordability targets, which are really the driving force around this amendment. So we erred on or sided on the notion of having a maximum unit, and we came in at 65 square meters or 700 square feet. We can certainly take a look at seeing if we could increase that somewhat to maybe satisfy some of the comments that Mr. Maloney made, but we want to caution that we're not trying to set this bylaw up and the official plan up to the point where we're going to be creating, two main dwelling units on a property. That's not what we're trying to achieve here. We want to make sure that the second dwelling unit is indeed kind of subordinate to the main dwelling unit.
Thank you, Ms. Weens. Mr. Maloney, I think that answers your questions.
That's fine. Thank you for your time.
Okay, and please, I did tell this to the other presenters. Perhaps the committee might want to have some questions for you. So please stay tuned. Is that right, Madam Clerk?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Under normal course, we would check the clerk's email address and see if anybody else has submitted any comments, and then we would close the public portion of the meeting, and then we would be moving into the committee input portion of the meeting.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Thank you.
There are no other pre-registered members of the public, so having said that, I will check the clerks at pelham.ca email address to see if anybody has emailed us while they've been live streaming. Mr. Mayor, I can confirm that it is 6:07 p.m. and I have not received any emails from the clerk's email address. Therefore, you could close the public portion of the meeting and move into committee input.
Okay, thank you. So now at this time, 6:09, we will close this portion, this public portion, input portion of the meeting, and we will continue on with committee input as the clerk has directed. So with that in mind, committee/council, any comments from councilors? And I see Councilor Kaur.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the Director of Planning. When we issue a permit for the second dwelling unit, are we going to notify the people within that neighborhood of a second dwelling unit going up?
Ms. Weens?
Mr. Mayor, through you, if council passes the proposed official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment, and that second dwelling unit conforms with the provisions of the official plan and zoning bylaw, they would be able to come in and apply for a building permit. And in that circumstance, there's no notification that's required or obligated to be given to surrounding residents or the surrounding neighborhood. If their applicant cannot meet the standards of the zoning bylaw, there is the ability to go to the Committee of Adjustment and apply for a minor variance. That, of course, is a public process, and in that circumstance, there would be circulation to the surrounding neighborhood with respect to a committee of adjustment application to change a provision for a second dwelling unit.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Court, Councilor Court.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the Director of Planning. Is the principal owner required to be a resident of the location when applying for a permit for a second dwelling unit?
Ms. Weens?
Mr. Mayor, through you, no, there is no requirement for the owner to be the resident. We cannot, through zoning, control who lives in a dwelling. And that's not something that we're able to do.
Thank you. Councilor Court?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. So then we're just creating duplex and triplex units without the principal owner not being a resident. So there's a possibility of entrepreneurs buying these residents and flipping them over to duplex or triplex.
Wish to comment, Ms. Weens?
Excuse me, could we amend the policy that we have I'm sorry, you answered the question. So we cannot force the principal owner to be a resident of that.
Mr. Mayor, through you, no, unfortunately through zoning, that's not something that we're able to do. It's actually, a charter right. So if, somebody is living in the principal resident portion, that could be a tenant. It's not necessarily that it has to be the owner, but the property owner would be the one who's responsible for the, construction and the installation of the second dwelling unit. The property owner is still the person who is responsible for the property, but he may have a tenant in there, and then he could have a tenant in the second dwelling unit as well.
Thank you, Ms. Weens. Any further? Okay, thank you, Councilor Court. Any further questions? Councilor Hildebrand.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. This is to the planning director. I guess I didn't make myself clear at the last meeting on February the 8th, because I thought I had specifically stated that I wanted the second dwelling unit counted as density and intensification. And I see that there's no comments made with regards to that. According to the draft OP from the region council, that council was presented on June the 7th, the policy states that it provides flexibility for local municipalities to plan for local needs. When you go on the local government website with regards to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, it says the benefits of second dwelling units assist municipalities in meeting their goals regarding affordable housing, intensification, and density targets. So then why wouldn't we have density included as part of the targets for second dwelling units?
I'll turn to Director of Planning, Ms. Weens.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We did amend the draft OP to say that it does apply. The intensification targets do apply to second dwelling units. So we did make that change in the draft OPA.
But that doesn't include the density.
The density, in our urban areas are at 50 persons and jobs per hectare, and the second dwelling unit permission, because if we do allow this to happen, then you're able to do it, and we would then be having to calculate the density on a theoretical basis, whereas in the intensification, we can track it through the building permit, and certainly not every residential dwelling will be doing this. That we expect that there'll be something less than 10% of the dwellings that would apply for this, so that we expect that the numbers will actually be fairly low, but will contribute to the intensification targets.
Well, my consideration is that we should include it, even though you have to do a calculation. It makes a difference because density and intensification are the two factors that contribute to our growth and complicate our issues as far as councils are concerned. because of the permits that these developers want to impose on us. So my direction is, yes, it should be included.
Okay, thank
Ms.
you.
Weems? Any other further comments, Ms. Weems?
Well, certainly. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We can certainly take a look at that. We did amend the draft to have it counted as intensification targets. But when we're developing new subdivisions, for example, at the subdivision approval stage, we don't know how many of those how many of those dwelling units will have a second dwelling unit or not. We don't know that. It's not something that we have at that point in time. We only know when it happens is when they apply for a building permit.
Any other comments, Councillor?
Yeah, just one other comment with regards to the size of the second dwelling unit in residential units. I think in the rural area, that's a different case. But I believe that the size of the second dwelling unit should be held at the direction that the region has given us and as the planning department has recommended, because I believe the size of the dwelling determines how many parking spots you're going to have. And we're only allowing one parking spot. So if you get a second dwelling unit of 1,000 or 1,500 square feet, it's hard for me to imagine that there only won't be one car parked in that parking lot. Thank you.
Any comment on that issue, Ms. Weems, before I move on?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly the requirement for the parking requirements will be a controlling factor. There's no doubt about that.
Okay, thank you. Next, I see Councillor Olson with his hand.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions. First of all, CMHC produced a report last week with respect to second dwelling units, and they said that the monthly carrying costs are reduced by 25% by having second dwelling units. Now, I'm supposing that would be a greater thing, and probably up to 100 or up to 50% for a second unit. They also said that between 35% increase and or to a 63% more water and sewage. They said 36 to 42% more garbage. And the final one was 27% to 40% more cars going with one unit. So I'm kind of satisfied. I think that that the one parking spot will cover even, but it seems like that's going to be satisfactory. But that's a last week's report based upon 10 years of experience with second dwelling units across the country.
Okay.
I do have a question for Ms. Weems. Now, secondary units, as we have them, they seem to qualify for Renovate Niagara grants. Is that correct? Grants and loans?
Ms. Weems?
Mr. Mayor, through you, I'm sorry, Councillor Olson, I'm not aware of the specifics of that program to say whether or not they qualify. I'd have to look into that and get back to you.
Well, I looked into it. It appears like that these each one of these dwelling units, I'm not sure whether now it's two, but they qualify for a $25,000 forgivable loan. And they have income restrictions on the people who rent, but the rent that we'd be charging is $933 a month in our community would be a qualifying rent. So this seems more and more attractive all the time to me, and I know it has a terrific attraction in the rural part of Pelham. I'm not sure about that about the square footage in the urban part of the community, and I'm glad we're reviewing it. I'm also glad that you presented the best practices along with the presentation, Ms. O'Toole. So So thank you. I just want to make those comments, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Olson. Move on to the next councilor. Do I see a hand? Do you see one, Holly?
Mr. Wink.
Oh, Councilor Wink, I'm sorry, you were frozen there for a while, Councilor. Okay, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Thank you very much for putting in the best practices of other communities because it's very helpful. I brought this up at the last public meeting and I'm going to bring this one up again. There's only one municipality that had a maximum height and accessory structure containing an SDU shall be the height of the principal dwelling unit located on the lot, or 8 meters, whichever is less. So again, my concern is you've got a bungalow and you can put a 2-story secondary unit behind it, and it will detract from the look of the neighborhood. I'm not sure what other councilors think, but I'm concerned about that optics. And if you look at the town of Ford area, a lot of their lots are a lot bigger. Their homes don't have garages, where I would venture to say most of our homes have attached garages as opposed to detached garages. And because they've got so many detached garages, it makes sense that you put something on top of it. But I'm still firm on the fact that I don't want to see something massive in the backyard as opposed to the front yard. So firstly, I'd like to have further comment on that from the planning department, and then further comment or thoughts of other councilors. Maybe I'm all wet, so.
Okay, thank you for that question, comment, Councillor, and I will go to the Director of Planning, Ms. Weens.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly we can look at a height limitation for a second dwelling unit. I think we did add something in the bylaw, and just forgive me while I look that up. Just one moment. We had a height of 7.2 meters, which is 23.6 feet, which would be the maximum height for an accessory residential building or structure. So that would allow, if you had a garage, you could put something above the garage. And so we restricted it that way. It would be one level above the garage. It would be in kind of the roof structure. It wouldn't be what I would call a full story. It's in the half story of the roof structure.
So you're saying it wouldn't be a separate detached dwelling then?
That scenario would cover if it's in a garage, but if it's a separate accessory building and not in a garage, then the maximum height is still the same. So we could clarify and provide some more language around that. I see Ms. O'Toole has her hand up.
Yep, Ms. O'Toole.
Thank you, Ms. Means, through Mr. Mayor too. Also, the height increase that we are talking about in the bylaw for section 7.7 is only applicable to agricultural.
Mm-hmm.
So the accessory height of these structures as it pertains to the urban area or within like a residential zone would be applicable to the accessory structure requirement that's already in our bylaw. So that increase of this to the 7.2 is only for agricultural rural accessory structures, not anything within residential zones.
So just for clarification then, what's in our urban zoning bylaws for separate structures then, as far as height is concerned?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the maximum height for accessory use structures is 3.7 meters. So 12.14 feet in height within the residential zones.
So I'm a little confused then, so help me out with this. So the height restrictions of 7.2 meters apply to the agricultural zones. There is no, like the 3.5 or whatever is the maximum, will continue to be the maximum height in the urban areas then. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so I'm not seeing the language in the draft bylaw as such. It says in section 2 that maximum height is 7.2 meters, but that doesn't pertain to the agricultural area. That's saying that that's throughout the town.
Ms. O'Toole?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, that we have, sorry, yes, we have that increase, but we would be able to relook at something like that. Sorry, my apologies. I was looking at the section 7.7 as well for the agricultural. My apologies. So you are correct. It is across the municipality. Sorry.
So I'll throw just comments to other councillors. How are you feeling about the 7.2?
Yeah. Councillor Hahn.
Thank you. Through the mayor, I would agree with Councillor Wink. I think that it would look like a sore thumb and really detract from the look and feel of communities where, in the example that Councillor Wink used, you would have a bungalow and then a 2-story addition basically on the back. I think that would look very strange, and I don't think it would be welcome necessarily by others in the community living nearby. Another question I have is with regards to, and I know I've brought this up many times before, but I'm just wondering about the parking study. My issue was when we talked about SDUs before, and that is regard to parking. So with one stall that has to be provided, my concern is if there is more than one person living in the second dwelling unit, or they have company over, visitors, what have you, they're going to be parking on the roads, and the roads are going to possibly fill up with parking that is for the secondary dwelling unit visitors or the other person that happens to live there with a vehicle. I don't know that that's going to be particularly welcomed by people who live in the community. So I'm just wondering, was there any consideration in the parking study that's being done for secondary dwelling units?
I will ask
the Director of Planning.
I will ask Ms. Weens to comment on that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. So the regulations under the Planning Act only allow us to apply one parking space for a second dwelling unit or an apartment in a house. We cannot apply a higher parking standard. Again, that's a regulation under the Planning Act. And so we've applied that standard in the proposed bylaw amendment.
Councillor Hahn?
Okay, so the second part of my question was with regards to the parking study that's being done. Is there any consideration for the fact that now, when they're thinking about parking in the town of Pelham, if there's going to be additional parking road stalls taken up by visitors or other people with additional cars beyond the one stall that's provided for the secondary dwelling unit, have they considered that as part of their study and the work they're doing?
Ms. Weens?
Mr. Mayor, through you, I can, the parking study has been somewhat on hold because of the pandemic, because they haven't been able to do their parking counts because, businesses have been closed, and we've been wanting to do the on-street parking assessment in our core areas, and we've been unable to do that. We do have a meeting next week with the consultants to try to kick this study off now that there is some reopening going on. So that will certainly be a question that I will bring forward to them. Specifically off the top of my head, they are looking at parking requirements and our parking standards. So on-street parking is something that we do allow in the town of Pelham, except during winter snow events. So we do have the ability to have on-street parking, and oftentimes on-street parking is what, you know, visitors will use when they're coming to visit someone.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and the reason I bring this up is because even in my neighborhood, I can see, you know, when people have visitors over, there's just such an increase in parking on the street that people who want to park in front of their own home can't. And so now they're walking quite a distance. And if this is something that's going to be not just once in a while, but a regular event because somebody has more than one vehicle for a secondary dwelling unit, then that could be a cause of frustration for the neighbors. And then I think we'll have to address things where, you know, there's only certain sides of the street that can allow for parking, or put some sort of parameters around when those can be used and that kind of thing, like some other cities do. Because I know it can get very frustrating when in front of your home, it's always filled with other people that are like tenants, that kind of situation. But thank you for answering that question and for bringing that up to the folks that are doing the study. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Well, this will go along with parking as well, but I'm concerned about secondary dwelling units being added into townhouses where the yards are notoriously small, and along with the parking, I feel that most of them have inadequate parking to begin with. So with those circumstances, it would be difficult for them to get a building permit to put in a secondary unit because they wouldn't have that space for an additional stall without going beyond the width of the garage. But my question is, would they be able to take that to the Committee of Adjustment and sort of overrule that and perhaps widen their driveways and take up more of their yard space? And another question, just if you could just explain to me what a stacked townhouse is. I'm not familiar with that term. Thank you.
Okay, Director of Planning, Ms. Weens.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. So we were quite deliberate in putting in the maximum width of the driveway. Again, we don't want to see front yards being taken up and turned into parking lots for cars. That's not what we want. That changes a character of a neighborhood. So we were quite deliberate in having that maximum width. So could somebody apply to the Committee of Adjustment to make an application to increase that? Yes, they can make the application, but they'd have to demonstrate how, if they're going to increasing it, it's still meeting the purpose and the intent of the bylaw, and what hardship this provides to them before the committee could rule in favor. Because we were very deliberate with the intent of that provision, it's going to be difficult for people to argue that they can meet the intent if the intent was to minimize the impact on kind of the front yards, the amount of green space, and the landscape that we provide. So while I cannot determine or prejudge what a Committee of Adjustment decision might be in the future, and I don't want to speculate on that, that would be one of the tests that they'd have to demonstrate and prove, is that they can meet the intent of that provision, and also demonstrate the hardship. So I think we've tried to put some checks and balances in place to, again, manage and control the impact that parking might have on the broader community. With respect to stacked townhouses are a townhouse unit, one on top of the other. So they're traditionally about 3 stories in height, and you see them in kind of fairly urban type of areas for area built form. It's a fairly urban built form. So it's a townhouse unit, but there's one on top of the other.
Thank you.
Okay. I have one question for Ms. Weens. I'm going back to the parking issue, and I realize you're not a resident of the City of London, but I see that in the parking that no additional parking is required for additional residential units. So as a planner, my question to you is, as a planner, how do you, how are they handling their excess parking as a curiosity point? Are they just, obviously they must be happy to have them on the street, or how would you, what's your guesstimate on that?
So yes, I mean, they would probably allow for on-street parking. City of London also has areas where you need to have like parking passes to park on the on-street so that they can manage it. But they also have a very, sorry, there's sirens going by in my neighborhood. They also have a fairly robust transit system and public transit. So, you know, they feel that a lot of the people that would be renting second dwelling units wouldn't have a car to begin with, and they would rely on public transit.
Oh, great. Thank you for that. Yeah, of course, if you got a good transit system, it takes the pressure off. Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Olson now. And you're on mute, sir.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, perhaps I can shed some light on that. The uptake of secondary units in the City of London was 3.7% on the total number of houses of 3,739. And locally, the local number for St. Catharines is 3.6. So you're probably going to be in the area of 5 or 6%. With the number of people that uptake on this type of thing, excluding the rural area, which seems to be more popular.
Thank you for that, Councillor. And I'm sorry, Councillor Stewart, back to you again.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Here we are with parking again. Okay, we have, you know, our minimum number of parking spaces per residence. Do you know what the number would be for London? Possibly they have a higher number of spaces that are a requirement, so that would mitigate the need to add more.
Ms. Weens, here we are quizzing you on the City of London. We apologize for that. Any idea on that?
Only if you know. You don't need to guess.
I see that Tara's actually, Ms. O'Toole's actually searching for that. What I can comment on before she finds that with respect to Councillor Olson and the percentage of households that do this, we expect we will be somewhere around 2 to 3% in terms of households that would have second dwelling units. We're not expecting that this will be over time a very large percentage of people that would do this. I don't know, Ms. O'Toole, if you've been able to find I'll find it, so no. I can't say for certain what it is, so I apologize for that.
No,
that's okay.
You're not expected to know everything off the top of your head.
That's right. Ms. O'Toole, any luck?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I am looking, and currently in their general provisions, they have the word parking in over 500 places. No. So I will do my best to get you an answer. Okay. And I apologize if I can't get one to you by the end of this meeting.
Okay, we will continue on with any further questions then and leave you to your search. Thank you. Councillor Hildebrand.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. To Mr. Councillor Wink's suggestion with regards to building height. Absolutely. We had a building go up in our ward that was over the height, extremely high, and it caused no end of issues for the residents. So I believe the height restriction of keeping it under the existing roof level is a great one. So the 12.4 feet, I think, probably would be appropriate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor. Any other comment on the height or anything other than Councillor Kaur?
Yes, I also agree with Councillor Wink. It just wouldn't make sense, especially if you walk the streets of Strathcona, where you have these single level dwellings, and all of a sudden you come upon in the backyard you see a two level building. It just wouldn't suit the neighborhood. So I fully agree with Councillor Wink.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. So Ms. Weens or Ms. O'Toole, do you foresee this this language being included in the bylaw coming forward?
Mr. Mayor, through you, I certainly hear council members loud and clear, and we will make some adjustments to that. I think there are some opportunities where you could have a second dwelling unit above a garage, but again, I think those opportunities are fairly limited, but we can perhaps specify two different standards, one where there is that circumstance, and then one where it's just a standalone second accessory building that's not attached or doesn't provide for a garage function, that it be restricted in height to the 3.4 meters, I believe.
Great. Thank you for that, Ms. Weens. Any other questions or comments at this time? Councillor Hahn?
Thank you. Through the mayor, I guess I just wanted to get to the rest of council's opinion on the idea of urban versus rural with regards to the size of the 750 square feet. So in the urban environment, so in a subdivision, I get it. I understand, like you could be tweaked a little bit, 850, whatever. But in a rural area where you have a larger lot, you typically don't have neighbors right next door, immediately next door. It's still the same. So I guess I would look at wanting to see what that can be as far as a change and as a percentage, which would be actually what Patrick had earlier, the fellow that was on, I think it's Patrick, had mentioned in a rural area as far as a percentage.
Ms. Weens, I believe the rural is larger, but Ms. Weens, could you clarify that?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, through you. Yes, we did increase the maximum unit size for a second dwelling unit in the rural and agricultural area to 1,000 square feet or 93 square meters. So that would allow for, certainly a very good size 2-bedroom dwelling, or even a 2-bedroom with a den, or a 3 small bedroom dwelling.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? I would just like to say that living in the rural part, I've had several neighbors ask how this is progressing through council. I think that initially we will see quite a large, I wouldn't say large, we're going to see quite a few people take advantages, especially in the rural area. Aging parents and what have you. So I am very happy, excited that this has come down from the province, and that we as a council will be implementing this. I think it's a great thing for affordable housing, and great for the community. So my own thoughts. Any other comments? I'm Ms. O'Toole. Any progress on your search?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I did find some information. There are parking standard provisions for residential developments. Single detached and semi-detached require 2 spots per unit. Duplex, triplex, and townhomes, as well as apartments, is 1 spot per unit. And then they do specify the conversion of a dwelling or conversions of existing spaces for additional residential units require no additional parking.
Okay. Thank you for your search efforts. Councillor Olson?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm having second thoughts about the size of the dwellings, the second dwelling units in the rural area. I think they should be something in the order of somewhere 1,250 to 1,500 square feet.
Okay, thank you for that. Any, first, before I go to any other councillor, I'll ask Ms. Weens to comment on the possibility or what you think of increasing the rural size that much.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, through you, certainly the larger the dwelling that you're going to have, the greater the impact it will have on the agricultural area, but also the ability to service it on the existing septic system or expansions to the existing septic systems. So we feel that, we think that 1,000 square feet for a second dwelling unit in an agricultural area is reasonable, and it will still provide and meet kind of one of our objectives in terms of housing affordability. Once you get to 1,200 or 1,500 square feet, you're just going to get another regular house, and people are, it's not necessarily going to hit an affordable target. So again, that's kind of what we're trying to do, is balance all of these kind of initiatives and requirements. And we blended on the 1,000 square feet as being appropriate. I think it's important to note that in the agricultural area, we want to really make sure that we're not setting up where we create land use impacts with additional non-farm residential people entering the agricultural area and not being familiar with kind of the activities in the agricultural area and the noise and odor that goes around along with farming. And so we're just trying to like I say, balance all of the interests. And so we feel that the 1,000 square feet or 93 square meters is appropriate.
No. Okay, thank you for that. Any further comments, Councillor Olson? I guess not.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, my phone went off. I had to turn myself off that time. So
okay.
You'd be surprised to know that to qualify for the rental. The Niagara Renovate, $25,000. In Fonthill, the break or the qualifying number is $737,000. So if you have a house worth $737,000, you can apply for $25,000 for creating a second dwelling unit. So I think the affordability part of it, I think I still think the rural part should be somewhere 1,250 to 1,500.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor. I guess one thing that would be a little easier, although the cost stays the same, is most rural residents, as Councillor Hahn pointed out, your neighbors aren't that close. So if you applied for a variance with a committee of adjustment, the chances of having any neighbors complain or overrule you would probably be minimal, but you would still have to take it to a committee of adjustment and pay the variance fee. I see Councillor Stewart.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I can see Councillor Olson's point about, a larger home, but the whole intent of this is to provide housing, and the intention is to be a secondary housing unit. So not every house that's in the rural area or on a farm is a big house. So if you're going to say 1,250 or 1,000 square feet, that can actually become the primary house rather than secondary to the main house. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Any other questions, comments on this before we move along? Okay, living out in the country, I again would like to comment on Councilor Olson's. Yes, I know where you're coming from, I guess, but I can also understand Ms. Weens. The 1,000 square feet, that is, of course, 1,000 square feet with a basement in it. They can have a basement, Ms. Weens?
They certainly can.
Yes. Okay, I appreciate that. Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? I'll turn to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does bring us to the presentations of resolutions. And for the first presentation of resolutions, I have a motion put forth by Councillor Wink that Council receive Report 2021-0100 as it pertains to second dwelling unit policies and regulations OP-AM-01-2020 and AM-04-2020, and that committee direct planning staff to prepare the recommendation report regarding the second dwelling unit official plan and zoning bylaw amendment for Council's consideration. For the vote, I would start with Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
And that carries. I have a motion put forth by Councillor Kaur that committee receive the written correspondence as listed on the agenda and that committee receive the verbal presentations made by the public listed on the agenda. For the vote, I'll start with Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, and that does carry. Mr. Mayor, I have a motion put forward by Councillor Hahn that this special committee of the whole public meeting under the Planning Act be adjourned. Mr. Mayor, I'd start the vote with Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hahn.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, that does pass, and it is 6:52, and you can gavel out your meeting.
Okay. Good night, everyone.
All right, good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.